Those are like the orthodox high fivers.
Well, I actually graduated from a more conservative school of high-fiving in Germany, so...
Really?
Yeah.
It was more like high performance, but you couldn't go outside the lines?
No, more like no high-fiving under any circumstances, because everyone's too gangly to... it'll result in injury.
Arvoyarns.
So yeah.
Yeah, welcome to Arvoyarns.
Arvoyarns.
This is Dorian.
Thank you.
We'll be having a conversation about all sorts of things.
Dorian
Philosophy,
Delfs.
Economics.
Yeah. First time, long-time listener, first-time guest. So,
Hopefully of many.
Thanks for your loyalty.
Dorian is... yeah. Dorian is an economist, a buddy of mine, and my neighbor.
Sweet, yeah. Economics, right?
We were talking about a little bit before the camera started rolling. I mean, we could start with the issue of, if you're interested in critiquing capitalism, how to do it. Do you take the moral route? Do you try to find some technical solution?
Well, when it comes to critiquing capitalism, I feel like saying the real problems with it would shoot my future career in the foot.
Haha.
But that being said,
politics.
there are... So, full disclosure, I love capitalism. It's fantastic. It's the least of all the evils we currently have. But that being said, if you guys want to know how to dig into the chinks in the armor a little bit, I would be happy to oblige.
Yeah. Well, just as a little bit of background. I mean, I think even to the, very beginning of modern capitalism itself, critiques of it have fallen in two groups, basically, even going back to Marx, where it's one route is to say capitalism's bad because it doesn't serve human interests, turns people into things, and in general, you mount a critique that it's bad on perhaps purely moral grounds. Another route that Marx himself took was to say, look, there's a lot of human potential that's being lost in the system. There's just this huge underclass, there's a few people making decisions and so forth. And so you could say, what he himself said, communism is inevitable because capitalism is going to go obsolete.
Well, Karl Marx, actually was had some very profound insights about capitalism. In fact, Das Kapital, the first really big chunk of it is basically a love letter. He read his stuff and studied it. I think personally, he had a very deep understanding. I think where he starts going into the critique and the sort of historical, scientific, quote unquote, analysis of it is where it starts to break down. And it's difficult.
Well, his analysis of the past or the future? Because, I think today you see this sort of,
He called it.
Well, this fulfillment of this idea that, capitalism makes the workers themselves obsolete. That, as more and more profits are driven into research and development,
capitalism is ultimately about progress.
Eventually, you get the AI singularity,
and
then it's
so. First of all, a little debunking here, right? So there's this team, sadly not specifically either of them an economist, Cobb and Douglas. Now, what they did is one of them was a politician, and actually he wanted to. He posed the question to a mathematician, as intelligent people should. Could the mathematician come up with a model that would show what the share of the share of profits in a system was to labor and what it was to capital? And this has been going since
what it should be, or what it is, what it is.
In order to quantify it, because that is a valid critique of Karl Marx. Obviously, if all the profits end up going to the capital owners and capital, and humanity gets left by the wayside, that's probably not a good system, right? So in the 70s, they came up with this model. You'd like this one little exponent coefficient for capital, one for labor, and they showed that it stayed since the 70s roughly equal. So the shares to capital and the shares to labor, actually a little bit more in labor's favor since the 70s, and that's been pretty smooth, which is a
now. When
a
you
nice
say labor, are we like talking about like what exactly?
Work,
like
like
the
people.
Income of,
What
of working people.
Yeah, you as you both as thinkers, how can you harness your human capital to what kind of profit can you get from
but that's tricky. So I've read about those kinds of models, and they have to make certain assumptions about what's your human capital? Like you have these abilities, you're born in this circumstance, so you could stand to make a shitload of money, and then that's take into account of your share of like the pie.
Well, this is
because that's a dicey proposition there.
It is, but this is just as simply as possible income versus.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what it is, and keep in mind that it's like a rough measure, and that's remained fairly consistent. Now, in the past years, we are starting to see a slightly higher return to capital, which makes this topic and these questions more relevant for now than ever. But at the same time, you have to look at something like this over many years, and a little jump or a spike there might lead to the wrong extrapolation.
Sure. And plus the whole game has been going on for not that long anyway. I mean, we just don't
and
even have that much data.
It's all experimental too.
That's
true. Although people make up the game. I mean, people.
That's what I'm saying.
Sit down and design markets. You know what I mean? It's like
make a market.
Yeah, we do have, and this is the lower bound of this is provable. We do have nowadays the highest proportion of millionaires and billionaires that has ever been seen in the entire world. And with that's one of the most relevant discussions we can have today is inequality. And Piketty doing his what was that? Capital, yeah.
For the 21st century.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we can go down that road of critique and talk about it some, but the real question is what is actually so bad about inequality? Because inequality is to some extent perfectly natural. I mean, you wouldn't look at animals in nature and say that all the different animals should be on equal footing. Like they're not going to agree.
Oh yeah. Well,
not that we want that, but I'm saying.
Well, this brings up a really interesting thing that I've been thinking about the last couple weeks, which is about when one appeals to nature, or this is what animals do.
Yes.
Predators, prey. We got this. What?
Not always a great idea, but
because it brings up the interesting question, right?
Yeah.
Like, are we here trying to discover the world as it is and to conform to it? Like, we're trying to learn how to be the beings that we are. So we look out in the world, we're like, okay, we got lions, we got wolves, we got sheep, we got all this going on. And we got to figure out how to harness that same incredible force, evolution, natural selection, where you have this profusion of animals, or maybe it's businesses, and some die, some live, and over time they get more fit to their environment. It's like, at the same time...
Evolutionary stable, please.
You could look at it like... Yeah, sure. You could look at it like, the long clamor of mankind over thousands of years has been precisely to create a space where evolution ceases to apply, where we take it into our own hands. That the entire point is we can go in there.
We're there now.
And here's an example. Why does the predator-prey cycle exist so often? And actually, it's the interaction between three layers, the microorganisms, the prey, and the predators themselves. Because suppose you have a bunch of sheep, and they get infected. There's some illness. Okay, so there's the herd, and then there's the sickly ones off to the side. They're like, okay, well, those are ones that are getting
sheep cough
picked up by the lion real quickly, and therefore the predator feeds on the weaklings or whatever of the herd, and it prevents that infection from spreading. So the herd stands to benefit.
True, yeah.
And so you're like, oh, great, yeah, so we'll have a bunch of, snake oil salesmen and con men, just bottom feeders, and it'll make capitalism stronger. But then you could be like, well, but we're human beings.
Yes.
So we could notice that these guys are sick and these guys aren't, and we could quarantine them. Humans put them behind one fence, put them behind the other fence, and then you don't have to have a fucking lion killing people.
Yes, and also it's important to note there with quarantines of vaccine.
You get a weird class system of like if you get sick, you're like immediately fucked for like in terms of contribution to society.
Well, we might be moving in that direction with healthcare going down the way it is. I mean, if it's too expensive, anyway. But that's another thing. So, what was I thinking of? So that's a good segue because while it's good to think of natural examples and what happens in nature, human beings have done a not a perfect job, but a decent job of putting some value add onto the basic natural components. So
great way of putting it.
With so much of it is just the value add. Like what's the iterative value? Because like the essential things that you need are like food, water, shelter, and like, socialization.
Yeah, socialization also very important. Not something we give enough credit for, but
I'm really interested in like different kinds of capital. Like you've got like social capital, you've got capital, money capital. You've got like your health capital. There's like attitudinal capital in the terms of like how I feel like attitudinal capital is like the metacognition of yourself to be like, okay, cool, like, oh yeah, I can like do this song and dance, or like I better not go in that river, I can't swim, or and so like it's
almost like you want a more general form of capitalism then that like capitalizes on all the many kinds of capital.
Yeah, well that's sort of like I think where we're going to with blockchain in a lot of ways.
hard segue.
Yeah, I don't want to hard segue.
Is that where you want to go?
Let's go back, rein it in just a second.
Okay.
For
what were we gonna say?
We need to center in around I think inequality.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, sure.
Break it down.
So for this sick example, why it's better to have medicine and healthcare and not let people who are weaker and have genetic things die out, which is terrible. But for the purpose of our conversation, also why that's a bad idea is because in nature, being the strongest is and the most well adapted is often the best thing. But humans have so much more potential, human capital, that if I'm in my 20s and I can't afford healthcare and I die, right? I can't afford medicine or whatever, I might have been able to, in my 30s, come up with something so profound that the potential contributions are so large and uncertainly great that's why humans have like this step up.
I know what you're saying, but it really, I think the fundamental question then is, how accessible is the potential? Because like there's this line I wrote in a song once: geniuses ain't born, they're made in environments. Like if you were to like break the kneecaps of a basketball player to be who is going to be really successful at 10 years old, it would be almost impossible for them to ever do that then. So the environment really has to be conducive to it. And so like the question with humans can sort of do this next stage iterative contribution to civilization and like the earth and existence. Well, first of all, how accessible is that?
Yes.
Because if it's not, then you've got somebody who has high potentiality, but usually high potentiality is linked with high expenditure of resources. Like humans can be really really high maintenance beings. So you're taking up space, but you're not able to reach the potential. And so I think a lot of in the economy, it really has got to be about how do you empower the people themselves to give them to the space to grow. That
is actually the entire point of economics. It's how do you provide, because we can't just say that's why certain plan systems fail. Like is because people think they have somehow unlocked the key to human potential, whereas the best way to unlock human potential is to give people the widest opportunity and freedom to pursue what they think is their best, their what they can do best.
Well, because it's like, more than any other animal, humans change their environment, and very little is stable.
Yeah.
And so
the only constant is change itself.
Even if you're super fit for your environment, at some like long evolutionary timescale. In terms of human timescale, everything could change in a little bit. At the same time, though, I mean, when you're designing a social system, it's tricky because
it's impossible.
Well, you're relying on the individual in some sense to be able to take the scope of their own possibilities to kind of deal with that freedom that you're describing, because oftentimes humans need to be. Yeah.
You're not doing that in a social system. What you're doing in a social system is you're taking away the potential for someone to, maximize according to what they think their human capital, instead of instead you're prescribing. I mean, as good as things as social institutions are, public education, health, all these things. Whenever we invoke something like that, we're also kind of taking away on the margins some opportunities from other people because we have to pay taxes. We could be using money for that for other things potentially.
Peter Thiel makes a really great point about this. He's like, have you ever noticed how like a lot of people go to business school, but not a lot of people have successful businesses? He's like, clearly, if it was in the business school, then everybody would have had that experience. And so he says, I think actually one of the most fundamental things is that a lot of people that go, they actually have fantastic ideas, but most of them are actually extroverted, just on average in terms of business degree. And so they socialize their ideas a lot, and so they get diluted because they listen too much to their peers. They're like, probably won't work. Whereas like a lot of introverted people, there's like a way higher percentage of introverted super rich people, for instance, because they're just like, I don't give a fuck.
Well, there's also something deep about that because it's just like if you're really an introverted person, then it probably terrifies you to have to rely on fucking talking to people.
Oh my God!
Sustain your life. You could just be like,
I never thought of it that way.
I'll pay with it. I'll pay with my card.
Well, it might be.
Talk to anybody.
It might be the case that if you're introverted, you might use the greatest economy of words if you hate communicating with people and talking to people, you're going to make sure that what you say counts so that you have to do as little of it as possible. And that might be the conciseness.
One of the great things about an actualized introvert.
Yeah. If you're able to say exactly what's necessary and not waste another breath.
Arvoyarns.